Okay. So I thought it would be interesting to look at an article from Soteriology 101 that is admittedly old, but it has to do with a question that um, I have been thinking about for the past few months. And I found this article, and that really expresses the things that I was thinking of. So I might as well go across it and go over it. So let me share my screen here. This overall, though, is going to be about predestination, and for fun, I'm going to be actually kind of defending the Reformed in this. Of course, I'm defending, the Lutheran view, but just modern, just in general, are being attacked for the most part in this. Anyway, some of this I'm just going to skip because it doesn't have to do with what we're going over. Uh, not that it's all automatically false and dismissing it. It just actually is kind of unrelated in my mind. So let's start here. I would like to combat the all too often heard accusation that the non Calvinist has grounds for boasting while Calvinists do not. What they're specifically speaking of is the objection to provisionism and maybe Arminianism for that matter, that the Arminian or the provisionist could brag about the fact that they have made a decision for God, or they haven't rejected the grace of God, or they've accepted the grace of God, right? And so, in the grounds of that, they could boast in their salvation. Uh, And so the writer, it just says admin, and I didn't see anywhere that says Leighton Flowers or anybody like him. So I'm just gonna refer to them as the author or the writer or whatever. Um, so the author is going to attempt to respond to that objection and actually say the Calvinist has a harder time with it. Please note that for whatever reason, the Calvinists or the provisionists say that pretty much everything monergistic is Calvinism. Uh, I had a video like maybe a year ago that showed how they think Augustine is basically the spawn of Satan in line with Ken Wilson. And they'll say that, Augustine created Calvinism out of his Manichaean and Gnostic beliefs, which is just blatantly false. Um, but for the most part, they're basically going to say that anybody that holds to monergism is a Calvinist. So for the most part, I'm just going to be reading the word Calvinist, but you could practically substitute monergist for most of this. There may be a sentence or two that's like, okay, this doesn't apply to Lutherans, but I'll try to clarify that. Um, anyway, let's continue. So no one is going around boasting about their ability to stand in front of those who choose to remain seated. Why? Because they know that those who are sitting could get up whenever they wanted. There is nothing unique or special about the ability to stand. Um, it would be comical to boast about doing something that any normal, able-bodied individual could choose to do. So for the record, what they're saying is not it never happens. What they're saying is it's unreasonable and nonsensical. So using a sports analogy or a sports example here, there was, you know, you could have a wide receiver who's like generally like pretty athletic in the NFL, but they're like not like amazingly above average. Like their guys more athletic than they are. Maybe they're, let's say they're like a 55th percentile of athleticism. It doesn't really make sense for them to like brag extensively about it, but nonetheless, it kind of happens. Kind of does. Like people where other people do more than they do, and yet they brag. It doesn't really make sense, but it does happen. So they're not saying, "Oh, it never happens," therefore, but they're saying it doesn't make sense, which I think is a reasonable thing to say. Anyway, um, we non-Calvinist, and for that matter, synergist, what they're speaking of, are too often accused that we could or would boast in our salvation because we affirm that it is our responsibility to freely respond in faith to the gracious Holy Spirit wrought gospel appeal. Is this really boastworthy? We are the ones who believe anyone can believe the gospel. Why would we boast in doing something anyone is able to do? It's the Calvinists who believe this ability is uniquely given to them and not most people. It makes much more sense for a Calvinist to boast in an ability granted to him that has been withheld from most others. This is a sentence where we're not going to use where we can't be shoved in here. The Lutheran is not going to be here because we're not going to say that the ability to believe has been withheld from the non-elect. We're going to say that God gives grace even to the non-elect, but for whatever reason they reject it, and we can't answer that in this life as to why. Uh, so continuing, a great singer, for example, is a given a rare wait, what? A great singer. Oh, okay. I did read it right. It's just poor writing. A great singer, for example, is given a rare gift from birth and can often become proud or boastful due to that unique gift. But if everyone was born able sing that well whenever they wanted, then boasting in that ability would not make any sense. Sorry, there's just a lot of grammatical issues here. I mean, that doesn't negate the point. It just frustrates me. It makes it hard for me to read this stuff. Should be take out this and then put a two here. Anyway, though, thus Calvinism leaves more room for boasting than does our soteriological perspective. So what they're saying overall is that on a monergistic view in general, well, because I can broaden this out to monergism. Um, the person who is elect and saved is someone whom God chose to be elect and thus saved, and they can brag that God chose them. Whereas for the provisionist, I mean, you don't really brag about something that everyone can do, and yet you're the one doing it. Like any able-bodied person, why are you the one that's bragging about it, right? Right. So they would say it doesn't really make sense for the provisionist or the Arminian to have pride, whereas it makes much more sense for the Calvinist too. Let me be very clear once again. I don't believe either system actually does have grounds for boasting, nor do I. I've been in both sides of this issue. Believe any good Calvinist or non-Calvinistic believer would desire to boast. But if one was comparing the two sides objectively, clearly it's the Calvinist who would have more grounds for boasting, given that his God-given abilities are more rare and unique to him, not the majority. This is where we're going to dispute. I think there are issues, but I'll go through it like down the line and I'll explain my position. So, for instance, if there was an immature Calvinist next to an immature Arminian, it would make more sense for the Calvinist to boast about his uniquely granted abilities than it would for the Arminian, who is merely doing something anyone else was able to do. Now, I don't think this is the case. I really don't. I think that in the provisionist system, there is significant room for boasting because, and the Arminian one for that matter, if we talk about like decision theology, um, because you're not merely standing. Sitting or standing is different than you have faith, which is itself a virtue that brings you salvation on that system. I don't say that faith as a virtue saves you, but in some sense, in their scheme, faith saves because, well, it's good. It's not because it unites you to Christ and it's God given. It's it's something that you're the one doing. And even if that's not the case with salvation, what you say is that faith is a virtue. And so you can brag about a virtue, no question. Right? Like, and I'm not saying people do, but I think we can look at somebody who, well, let's say two equal people in every way, except for the fact that one person's more loving than another. The person who's more loving, they can totally brag in that. They can totally brag, oh, I'm a better person. Absolutely they can. They shouldn't, you know? It's not the same as sitting and standing. Standing is not a virtue that gets you, merits before God. Whereas faith is a virtue. And I'm not gonna use the merit language, but in general, but faith as a virtue, we talk about virtues like you are rewarded in heaven for these things. I'm not gonna say we're justified by our merits, but like in heaven, there are merits in light of the works we do. And so yeah, just because someone's equally able to do it, but you're, better at it, that I think that's quite the room for boasting. I think a lot of people, for example, as a musician, there are a lot of people, they are way better at trumpet than I am. They can brag about that. I'm just as physically able, but they're better. There's no special innate talent. No, they're just better. In that case, I think in a way they have a right to brag. And I think this is another instance of that. With you are basically giving yourself faith because recall in the provisionist system specifically, the grace of God is not a grace that grants you faith. They're actually opposed it. They think that's like not just, oh, that's not how we're going to speak of it. The provisionist system is explicitly going to say, oh, well, the grace that God gives, like from the Bible, is just kind of information, and you're the one who gives yourself faith. Like everyone is kind of neutral, then you get faith just reacting to information that you're given. It's like a mathematical textbook. Seth and I had a video responding to or examining. I think it was the World Evangelical Alliance. We read an article that had that theology in there. So if you can watch that if you want more on it. But the provisionist system, yeah, Yeah, you give somebody information, they're just as equal bodied and they put in kind of more work, they develop more virtue. Yeah, yeah, there's room for boasting 100%. Like, give two equally, like in terms of the brain, like give two people, two kids, a math problem or a math textbook. Let's be more clear. Give two kids math textbook. Neither of them has like specific, um, mental disabilities or anything like that, where they can't do it. They're equal in a lot of ways. One person is able to read the textbook and understand it and react to it and do their homework. Another person isn't. Like, yeah, that's something you can brag about. You get rewarded for that in class, right? Like, yeah, you can brag. Yeah, I put in more effort here, and so I think there is room. I think there really is room to brag when not. It's not. Oh, someone gives me this, and I don't reject it, versus you give me this and I actively add my own part in. Because again, the provisionist system is not God gives you faith. Like the Lutheran system says, God gives grace to all, and some reject for whatever reason, but the elect are those who do not reject it. Yeah, we would say there is no room. There's not really room for boasting there. Whereas the provisionist system is going to be, oh yeah, God gives, everybody this information, then you act on that yourself. You're the one who adds something to it. That's what they do. They basically say you're the one who brings the faith. They say it's wrong to say that God grants faith. So I think there's a big problem there. I think there's totally room for bragging. Okay, but continuing. For example, I have 4 children and I brought home one toy for one child and not the others. Well, you can imagine what an immature child might do. He might boast in his new toy. Ideally, he would recognize that it was given a gift, or that he was given a gift, and has no reason to boast, and he would share his toy with his siblings. But as we parents know, that is all too rare. His reason for boasting is because he sees himself as being specially picked out and given something unique from daddy that the others were not given. This child feels special in contrast to his siblings. Yeah, I can recognize this is possible. Like as Christians, we could totally fall into this. It is possible. Now, I don't think there's as much ground for it because you could look at a child and say, hey, this child was doing really well the past few weeks, like behaving well, so they gave him a gift. But with the Christian, you say that's not possible. We don't behave well. We don't merit that, but nonetheless. Now, if I brought the same toys home for every child, and some of my children simply chose not to play with their toys, would it make any sense for the child who did not choose to play with the toy to boast about that? Of course not. And any of them could have chosen to play with the toy. There would be no reason for the child who chose to enjoy playing with it to boast as if the others who couldn't have done the same thing. This child would not feel special or favored by his father in a way that might lead to his boasting. I really do think that the problem with this person's analogies is that they're looking at neutral instances. They're looking at these instances like it's not more or less virtuous for a child to play with a toy. It is more or less virtuous to have faith. It is more or less virtuous to go, help a man out in the street. Like if you have two people who walk down the street and a man and there's an old man who's having trouble. Well, let me be clear. Let's start that over. Sorry. You have three people walking down the street. Two of them are just able-bodied. Another is an old man that needs help walking across the street. One man just keeps walking across. The other man helps the old man get across. Yeah, the guy that helped the old man, yeah, he has some room to boast. He totally has some room to boast that he helped this old guy walk across the street because he did something virtuous. I don't think that, you know, responding to the call of the gospel by giving yourself faith, by generating that faith within you, is the same as, oh, you got a toy and you can play with it. Neutral, morally neutral examples are not good comparisons for this. And then, yeah, the fact is that in the time of the New Testament, the Pharisees were boasting because they felt they were uniquely the chosen people of God, and all the other nations were not. They felt special. Well, yes, that is true, but the thing is that boasting in it really anyway is going to be a problem because the Pharisees still boast like, yeah, God, you made me so that I would do these things. And they're doing these very specific works that they are saying in some way there is a contribution. I mean, maybe not. Maybe not the Pharisee, the publican example is that occurring precisely, but I mean, I think we can look at like the Pharisee example. You could say, okay, here's a reformed, here's a Calvinist, and even then, not really. But here's an extreme view that could occur in light of monergism. But I mean, look at the medieval ages. Look at yeah, like there are people that are like, oh yeah, I can do my own works here. I can do that. That happens all the time. That definitely happened in the Middle Ages. Makes total sense. People were looking at their own works, even though someone else could do it, and boasting in it. In theory, any man could choose to be a monk, right? Yeah, you're boasting in the fact, yeah, you become a monk. Okay. And now they should have been grateful and humbled by the fact that God chose their nation, but the fact is, this made them prideful and boastful. Had those Pharisees believed that everyone in their entire world was chosen the same exact way that Israel had been chosen, then it would have made sense for them to become prideful and boastful in the election. Of course not. Again, that's what we're disputing. I just don't think he proves it whatsoever here. No one who understands salvation rightly in either soteriological system is able to boast. That's correct. Because salvation is totally up to God in both systems. I mean, okay. I would say that you should not boast if you're a provisionist, and in a way you don't have the ability, but I mean, it's not totally up to God to provisionist. It's not totally up to God. They're gonna say, "Yeah, you add something in here. You add the fact that you make your decision." Yeah, yeah. Like, okay, there's the debate of, "Oh, is it semi-Pelagian?" But it being synergistic, what they're doing is they're going, "Yeah, God gives me the information. I take that information and I kinda, hey, here's my decision. I'll add that in here." Right? It's not God gives you something and you're actively rejecting it, and that's how you don't get saved. It's God gives you something, now it's up to you to do something with it. You know? You're born in a way where you're fine, then you can do something. You can add a tiny, tiny little thing in there. But whenever it's not 100% God and it's if it's 99.9999% God, but that tiny little sliver one, you, you're still doing something and you can boast in that. And that's typically what happens. Okay, God can have mercy on those who he wants to have mercy. Just because someone humbles themselves, like, look, they're humbling themselves, you know. Just because someone humbles themselves and trusts in Christ doesn't mean they're any more deserving of salvation. I mean, in a way, that's I can agree. In a way, I can, but like they can boast though. Like we would say that there's a sense in which we humble ourselves when we receive the law, and that regenerates us. That gives us like okay knowledge of our sin. I mean, we have knowledge innately of the law, and we have it from experience. But we get it further in the law. We see we need Christ, and so there's a sense in which we are humbled. Like we humble ourselves insofar as there is a conscious act. We wouldn't say it's apart from grace. And so that's not the context of the provisionist. So their definition of grace is going to be, oh yeah, here's like just purely the information, and from there you're the one humbling yourself and trusting in Christ. I think in a lot of ways, you could argue, yeah, that means they're adding something in there. And then the rest of this, I think the rest of this doesn't really have way too much to do with it. It's just more so, oh yeah, call to humility. That's fair. I don't think that provisionists are always prideful by any means, nor are the Reformed. I actually don't see it way too much. Well, in terms of their salvation, I think there's arrogance in terms of like saying knowledge, and I think everybody who's into theology falls into that at some point. But ultimately, yeah, I don't think this is a very convincing article. To summarize, there are examples of people who, somebody you can't basically brag about being able to or doing something that everybody could easily do. I think there's a big difference between us standing up when everyone else is sitting and being more virtuous. I think there's a huge difference there, man. Because we can recognize, like, even though we as Christians are going to say that, or as Lutherans, we're going to say that faith doesn't save you in light of being virtuous, we're still going to say faith is a virtue. So, yeah. Now, this just brings me back to like the whole main point of this, which is I think that every group has some issue that they have to deal with in these. Sorry if my chair is so loud. I freaking hate this thing. It squeaks. But um, every group has some issue that they have to answer that they can't in this life. For the provisionist is why does this person respond and this other person doesn't? You could say, oh yeah, they're free will, but okay, well, again, take two people who are in the exact same circumstance, like in life. I mean, literal twins, for example. Let's say that you have twins born. And then they both, let's say they die at the age of 18 prior to going to college or different colleges. Maybe 22, they go to the same college, for example. What happens is born, raised together, go to the same churches, all that stuff. Maybe one falls away and one doesn't. I don't know. Like that's a totally reasonable thing to see occur. Maybe you can't. I mean, is it unlikely? Sure, but like, is it reasonable? Yeah. I think it's totally reasonable to say that would occur. I don't think you can chalk it up purely to circumstance. Like, oh, it's all out of their control. No, there's somebody that falls away and someone doesn't. And why is that? I don't know. Why is one person disposed to fall away? I don't know. So the provisionist can't answer that, nor can the Arminian. But the Lutheran, the Calvinist can't really go, okay, well, why does God elect this person, not another? I don't know. every single group is going to struggle with this to some level. And so I hope that article and my response to it show that really every group has problems. I do think that the provisionist or the Arminian is going to have more issues with that, because the bragging about God giving you something, I really do think that the Lutheran is most disposed against it, because the Lutheran position is not, well, God elects me against somebody else. It's for God gives everyone grace. God elects some, but for whatever reason, some reject it, and we don't. I don't know. And when I say we, I'm not trying to say that I'm elect, but you get my point. Like the elect, because I don't know for sure, but the elect, if they don't follow, I don't think they can go, oh yeah, I did a work. No, you just didn't stop something. The doctor comes in and like a doctor comes in and injects you with the vaccine that stops like a horrible disease. You don't go, oh hey, look, it's virtuous that I didn't stop him. Like, you don't really act that way as much as, oh, it's virtuous that I'm the one that took the needle and did it to myself, or I helped myself, or it's healthy that I did this. It's not really the same there. Um, but anyway, I think every group is going to struggle with this to at least some degree. And so this provisionist article was really bad. It just was disappointing to me. I found it really questionable. Um, but I doing this thanks to Colin Brooks kind of for this idea. I mean, he never just messaged me, hey, do this. Here's this article, but he's talked about how, on at least on his Twitter, hey, there are issues that each group has that you typically associate with one group, but the other group to whom you're opposed, they have it too. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you guys learned a thing or two here. Bye.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching another Scholastic Lutherans video. If you'd like to support us, you can follow us on Twitter at Gerhard's Ghost, or contribute on Patreon at Scholastic Lutherans. There you'll get access to our Telegram chat and other perks. Links can be found in the description. Subscribe, like, or leave a comment, and have a nice day.